The ceremony hall glittered with 1,000 colors, each representing a different species gathered to celebrate their heroes. David Reed stood near the back wall, trying to make himself smaller. It was difficult when you were the only human in a room full of beings who could crush stone with their bare hands. His wife, Kira, stood on the central platform, her scaled skin reflecting the light like polished copper. She was beautiful, even by draconian standards. 8 feet tall with horns that curved back from her temples and eyes that burned like molten gold. She wore her military uniform, decorated with medals earned in battles David could barely imagine, and for exceptional valor in defending Colony 7 against overwhelming odds. "We present the Star of Valor to Commander Kira Vell." The announcer's voice boomed through the hall. The crowd erupted in cheers. Kira bowed her head as the medal was placed around her neck. David clapped along with everyone else, pride swelling in his chest. She had saved 12,000 lives that day, fighting for 16 hours straight without rest. "Such a shame," a voice rumbled behind David. He didn't turn around. He knew what was coming. "That one of our finest warriors is bound to such a weak creature," another voice agreed. "Look at him. No claws, no scales, no natural armor. What use is he?" David kept his eyes on Kira. He had learned to ignore the whispers. They followed him everywhere in Coalition space. Humans were the newest members of the galactic community, and they were notoriously fragile compared to most other species. "I heard he was a clerk or something, a paper pusher. No wonder she never brings him to military functions. I would be embarrassed too." David's jaw tightened, but he remained still. Getting angry would only prove their point. Humans were emotional, they would say, unstable, weak in body and mind. Kira finished her speech, thanking her fellow warriors and the Coalition for the honor. As she stepped down from the platform, a massive draconian warrior blocked her path. Commander Roth Tal. David recognized him immediately. Roth had served with Kira for years and made no secret of his feelings for her. "Kira," Roth said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet hall, "you honor us all with your courage. But I must speak plainly as a warrior should." Kira's eyes narrowed. "Speak then, Roth. You deserve a mate worthy of your strength. A true warrior who can stand beside you in battle." Roth glanced toward David with unconcealed contempt. "Not a human who hides in the shadows while you fight." The hall went silent. Every eye turned to look at David. He felt his face grow hot, but he didn't move. This was Kira's moment, not his. Kira's voice dropped to a dangerous growl. "You dare question my choice of mate?" "I question your judgment," Roth replied. "What can this human offer you?" "Protection. He cannot even protect himself. Strength? A child could overpower him. Honor? He has never seen battle." David finally moved, stepping forward through the crowd. Aliens parted before him like water. When he reached Kira's side, he placed a gentle hand on her arm. "It's all right," he said softly. "It is not all right," Kira snapped, but her anger wasn't directed at him. "Roth, you forget yourself." "I forget nothing," Roth said. "I remember when you were the pride of our people. Before you married this human." David met Roth's gaze calmly. The draconian warrior towered over him by 3 feet and could probably tear him apart without effort. But David had learned something during his years in space. Physical strength wasn't everything. "You're right," David said, his voice steady. "I'm not a warrior like you. I can't breathe fire or bend steel. But I love her and she loves me." "That's enough for us," Roth snorted. "Love, a human concept. Warriors need strength, not soft feelings." "Then perhaps you don't understand what makes a true warrior," David replied. The crowd gasped. Several draconians growled low in their throats. Challenging Roth's honor was dangerous, even for another draconian. For a human, it was practically suicide. Roth leaned down until his face was inches from David's. Heat radiated from his breath. "You have courage, little human. Foolish courage. Perhaps you wish to back up your words with action?" "Roth, enough!" Kira stepped between them. "This is neither the time nor place. She protects you," Roth said, laughing. "Like a mother protecting a child. This is the mate of our greatest warrior. Pathetic." David felt something old and cold stir inside him. A memory, perhaps, or something deeper. His hand unconsciously moved to the sword at his hip. It was an old blade, passed down through his family for generations. Most aliens found it primitive and amusing, a weapon from Earth's distant past, useless in an age of plasma weapons and energy shields. But the sword felt warm under his touch. almost alive. Before David could respond, alarms blared throughout the hall. The celebration lights dimmed, replaced by harsh red emergency lighting. A hologram appeared in the center of the room, showing a coalition officer with fear in his eyes. Priority alert to all military personnel. Outpost Delta 9 is under attack. The enemy is... They're shadow entities. The void has returned. The hall erupted into chaos. Warriors rushed toward the exits, calling for their weapons and their ships. Kira grabbed David's hand, her eyes wide. The void, she whispered, after all these years. David had heard stories about the void. Ancient tales of shadow creatures that consumed entire worlds, that even the mighty Draconians feared. He had thought they were legends, warnings told to children, but the fear in Kira's eyes told him otherwise. I have to go, she said. David, stay here where it's safe. Kira, please. She squeezed his hand. I cannot fight if I'm worried about you. David nodded slowly. What else could he do? She was right. He would only be in the way. Kira kissed him quickly, then ran after the other warriors. Roth paused at the doorway, looking back at David with something almost like pity. Stay hidden, human. Leave the fighting to those strong enough to face it. Then he was gone, and David stood alone in the empty ceremony hall. The Star of Valor lay forgotten on the platform, its light dimmed by the emergency alarms. David looked down at his sword, the ancient blade that everyone mocked. In the red light, he could almost see something moving within the metal. A shimmer, like heat rising from summer pavement. Maybe, he whispered to himself, it's time to stop hiding. He didn't know why he said it. He didn't know what he meant. But deep inside, in a place beyond thought or reason, something ancient woke up and whispered back. Soon. David refused to stay behind. He pulled rank as a diplomatic liaison, a position he rarely used, and secured a spot on the transport ship heading to Outpost Delta 9. Kira hadn't been happy about it, but she had too many other problems to argue. Now he sat in the troop compartment surrounded by warriors who pretended he didn't exist. Draconian soldiers checked their plasma rifles and energy blades. A group of Thorian shock troops, massive beings made of living crystal, meditated in silence. Even the pilot was a decorated veteran, a four-armed Sithari with enough combat experience to fill a library. And then there was David, wearing a simple environmental suit and carrying a sword that belonged in a museum. The ship shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace. Through the viewport, David could see Outpost Delta 9, or what was left of it. The station hung in space like a dying star. Sections of it were simply gone, as if something had taken bites out of the metal. The defense shields flickered weakly, barely holding. Worse were the shapes moving around it. Dark things that seemed to absorb light itself, leaving holes in space where they passed. By the ancient fires. Someone whispered. There are hundreds of them. Roth stood at the front of the compartment, his face grim. Listen well. These creatures feed on energy. They will drain your shields, your weapons, even your body's natural energy. Stay together. Watch each other's backs, and for the sake of all life, do not let them touch you. The ship docked with the station through an emergency airlock. The moment the door opened, David heard the screaming. Warriors poured into the corridor, weapons ready. David followed, keeping close to Kira. She had given up trying to send him back. Instead, she had assigned herself as his personal guard, which made several soldiers grumble about wasted resources. The outpost was a nightmare. Emergency lights cast everything in shades of red and black. Bodies lay scattered in the corridors, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. Some were dried husks, as if every drop of moisture had been sucked out of them. Others looked peaceful, like they had simply fallen asleep and never woken up. They drain life itself, Kira explained, her voice tight. Not just energy. Everything that makes something alive. A shadow moved at the end of the corridor. It had a roughly humanoid shape, but its edges kept shifting and blurring. Where it touched the walls, the metal corroded and crumbled. Open fire, Roth commanded. Plasma bolts filled the corridor with blue-white light. The energy beam struck the shadow creature dead center. But instead of destroying it, the creature seemed to drink the energy in. It grew larger, more solid, more real. Cease fire, Roth shouted, but 3 more soldiers had already fired. The shadow creature swelled to twice its original size. Then it lunged forward with impossible speed. The creature tore through the front line like paper. Soldiers fell, their shields useless. Their energy weapons became liabilities. Every shot they fired only made the creature stronger. David watched in horror as a Thorian warrior, a being strong enough to punch through starship hull, was touched by the shadow. The crystal giant didn't even have time to scream. He simply crumbled to dust, his life force consumed in seconds. Fall back. Kira was pulling David away, back toward the ship. Everyone fall back! But more shadows were appearing now, cutting off their escape. The warriors found themselves trapped between the creatures, their most powerful weapons useless against an enemy that fed on energy itself. Roth roared in frustration, launching himself at the nearest shadow with just his claws and teeth. For a moment, David thought it might work. Physical attacks didn't feed the creatures, but Roth's natural energy, the power that ran through every draconian, was still fuel for them. The shadow wrapped around him like a blanket, drinking deep. Kira screamed her fellow warrior's name. She started forward, but David grabbed her arm. Don't, he said. You can't help him that way. Then what do we do? Kira's voice broke. How do we fight something that uses our strength against us? David's mind raced. He had studied ancient warfare, back when he was a military historian for Earth's defense forces. Before the incident that got him discharged. Before he met Kira and left all of that behind. Physical weapons, he said suddenly. Old-style weapons that don't use energy. That's primitive, a soldier spat. Useless against real threats. More useless than weapons that make the enemy stronger. David shot back. He drew his sword. The blade caught the emergency lighting, reflecting it in strange patterns. For just a moment, David thought he saw those patterns form words. Ancient words in a language he didn't know but somehow understood. Strike true. One of the shadow creatures noticed him. It flowed toward him like smoke, ignoring the warriors with their plasma weapons. David's mouth went dry. Every instinct screamed at him to run. But he thought of Kira. He thought of all the people dying because energy weapons were useless. He thought of Roth's mocking words about human weakness. Then he stepped forward and swung his sword. The blade passed through the shadow creature's form. David expected it to do nothing. But where the sword touched, the shadow recoiled. Not destroyed, but hurt. Definitely hurt. The creature made a sound like tearing metal and pulled away from him. It retreated into the darkness, leaving behind a smell like ozone and decay. Everyone stared at David, at his sword, at the place where the shadow creature had fled. How? Kira whispered. David looked at his blade. It was glowing now, just faintly. A soft blue light that seemed to push back the darkness. I don't know. But it worked. Roth pulled himself free from the shadow that had been draining him. The draconian warrior looked weak, his scales dull and his breathing labored. But he was alive. He stared at David with new eyes. Your weapon. It has no power source. It's just steel, David said, forged on Earth centuries ago. Not just steel, a new voice said. An old woman appeared from a side corridor, leaning on a staff. She wore robes that marked her as an elder, one of the ancient beings who guided the coalition. That blade carries something far older than steel, something the void fears. Elder Cirrus. Kira bowed her head in respect. What are you doing here? Waiting, the old woman said, her eyes fixed on David. Waiting for someone to remember what was forgotten. Young human, your ancestors fought these creatures before. Long before space travel. Long before the coalition existed. That's impossible, David said. Humans only reached the stars 200 years ago. You reached them again, Elder Cirrus corrected. Your people have risen and fallen before. And each time you fought the void, each time you won. Not with energy or advanced technology, but with something simpler. Something pure. She gestured to his sword. That blade is a key. One of many. The void has returned because the old locks are failing. And only humans can forge them anew. A roar echoed through the corridor. More shadows were coming, drawn by the commotion. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. The surviving warriors grouped together. But without their energy weapons, they were nearly helpless. David looked at his sword, then at Kira's frightened face. He thought about running, letting someone else be the hero. He was just a historian after all, a weak human in a galaxy of warriors. But his hand tightened on the sword's grip, and it grew brighter, warm, almost alive. Get everyone to the ship, he told Kira. I'll buy you time. David. No, trust me, he said, meeting her eyes. For once, let me protect you. Before she could argue, he ran toward the advancing shadows. His sword blazed with light, cutting through the darkness. Behind him, he heard Kira shouting orders, organizing the retreat. David didn't know if he would survive, but for the first time since entering Coalition space, he felt strong, not despite being human. Because of it. 3 days passed after the disaster at Outpost Delta 9. David spent most of that time in the medical bay. Not because he was injured, but because scientists wanted to study his sword. They ran every test they could think of and found nothing special. Just old steel and leather grip. Yet everyone had seen it glow. Everyone had seen the shadows retreat from it. Elder Cirrus finally put an end to the tests. She ordered David, Kira, and a select few warriors to join her on a journey. Their destination was a place called Ash's End, a dead world on the edge of known space. She refused to explain why until they arrived. The planet looked like its name suggested. Gray ash covered everything, drifting in the thin atmosphere like snow. Dead cities jutted from the ground like broken teeth, and in orbit around the planet floated thousands of wrecked ships. Some were recognizable Coalition designs. Others were older, stranger. A few were so ancient they had to be thousands of years old. What happened here? Kira asked, staring at the graveyard of vessels. The First War, Elder Cirrus said quietly. When the Void first came to this galaxy, every species that could fight came here to stop them. Most never left. The ship descended through the ash clouds and landed near a massive structure. It was a temple, but unlike any David had seen before. The architecture was wrong somehow. The proportions and angles made his eyes hurt to look at too long. But there was something familiar about it too. Something that tugged at his memory. I know this place, he whispered. I've seen it before. In dreams, perhaps, Elder Cirrus said. Your blood remembers what your mind has forgotten. Roth stood with them, still weak from his encounter with the Void. The proud warrior had been quiet since the outpost, watching David with a mix of confusion and grudging respect. Now he carried a simple metal spear instead of his plasma rifle. Several other warriors had also abandoned energy weapons in favor of basic blades and clubs. They entered the temple through doors that opened at Elder Cirrus's touch. Inside, the walls were covered with carvings. They showed figures fighting shadow creatures. The figures were small, with no natural armor or claws. They looked almost human. Your ancestors built this place, Elder Cirrus explained as they walked deeper into the temple. Humans were the first to face the Void, the first to learn how to fight them. But humans weren't even spacefaring back then, David protested. How could they build something here? They didn't need ships, the Elder said. They had something better. They had will. The group reached a large chamber. Holographic displays activated as they entered, showing scenes from the ancient war. Humans, thousands of them, standing against waves of shadow. They fought with swords and spears, shields and arrows, primitive weapons that glowed with the same blue light David's sword produced. One hologram showed a human warrior, facing down a massive void creature alone. His sword blazed like a star as he struck, and the shadow thing dissolved into nothing. How? Kira asked. How did they make their weapons glow? They didn't make them glow, Elder Cirrus corrected. The weapons reflect what burns inside them. Humans feel things deeply, love, hope, courage, desperation. Those feelings become real when facing the Void. They become power. Emotional energy? Roth sounded skeptical. That's not possible. Yet you saw it work, the Elder reminded him. David's sword glowed because he was protecting those he cared about. The Void feeds on physical energy, yes, but they starve on emotions. Human emotion is poison to them. David stared at the holograms. His sword felt heavier at his hip, more important. What happened to them? The humans who fought here. Elder Cirrus's face grew sad. They won, but at terrible cost. They sealed the Void away using weapons of incredible power, weapons forged from pure human will. These weapons became known as Heaven's Edge. But to power them, the warriors had to sacrifice everything. Their lives, their world, their future. Only a handful survived, scattered across the galaxy. In time, humanity forgot its past and had to claw its way back to the stars the slow way. Why are you telling us this now? Kira asked. Because the seals are breaking, Elder Cirrus said. The Void is returning, and humanity's new generation must take up the burden their ancestors carried. She led them to the center of the chamber. There, floating in a beam of light, was a sword. It looked similar to David's blade, but larger, more refined. The metal seemed to shift colors as they watched, never quite settling on any shade. The Sword of Dawn's breaking, Elder Cirrus announced, one of the 7 Heaven's Edge weapons. It was forged by a human warrior named Sarah, who gave her life to trap the Void King himself. The sword has waited here for millennia, for another human worthy to wield it. David felt drawn to the sword. His own blade vibrated at his side as if recognizing its older sibling. He reached out slowly. Wait, Roth grabbed his arm. If this weapon is so powerful, why not let someone stronger wield it? A Draconian or a Thorian? Because it will kill them, Elder Cirrus said bluntly. The Heaven's Edge weapons respond only to human emotion. Any other being who touches them will be consumed. Even humans risk death. The power is too great for most to contain. David hesitated. Then maybe we should find another human. Someone trained, someone. Alarms blared throughout the temple. The holographic displays changed, showing the space around Ash's End. Dozens of void creatures were materializing, bigger than the ones at the outpost. They were tearing through the ship graveyard, feeding on the residual energy in the old vessels. They know we're here, Kira said, drawing her blade. They've come for the sword. Not just the sword, Elder Cirrus corrected. They've come to destroy it. If this weapon is lost, we lose any chance of stopping the Void King. The warriors formed a defensive circle as the temple began to shake. Somewhere above, the void creatures were breaching the structure. David could hear the sound of stone crumbling, of reality itself being torn apart. He looked at the Sword of Dawn's breaking, then at his own simple blade. Then at Kira, who stood ready to die defending him. At Roth, who had overcome his pride to stand with them. At Elder Cirrus, whose ancient eyes held so much sadness and hope. What do I do? He asked the elder. If I take the sword? You fight, she said simply. You become what your ancestors were, a guardian against the dark. But David, listen to me carefully. This weapon will change you. It will burn inside you forever. There is no going back. A wall exploded inward. Shadow creatures poured through the gap, flowing like water. They ignored the other warriors and focused on the floating sword. One touched the beam of light and shrieked, pulling back. But more came, testing the barrier, weakening it. David didn't think. He reached out and grabbed the Sword of Dawn's breaking. Pain shot through him. Not physical pain, but something deeper. The sword was testing him, reading his soul. It showed him every moment of weakness in his life. Every time he had been mocked or belittled. Every time he had felt inadequate standing next to Kira. Every doubt, every fear, every shame. But it also showed him every moment of courage. Every time he had stood his ground despite being afraid. Every act of kindness when cruelty would have been easier. Every day he had chosen to love Kira despite a galaxy that called him foolish. The sword found what it was looking for, something unbreakable at his core, something that refused to quit no matter how hard the universe pushed back. David's eyes snapped open. The sword blazed in his hand like captured lightning. The shadow screamed and retreated from the light. Now, Elder Cirrus said, her voice filled with something like joy, now you begin to understand what it means to be human. David looked at his reflection in the blade and barely recognized himself. His eyes glowed with the same blue light as the sword. Power thrummed through him, begging to be released. The void creatures charged. David raised the Sword of Dawn's breaking and prepared to show them exactly what humanity was capable of. David moved without thinking. His body knew what to do. As if the sword carried memories of every warrior who had ever wielded it. He spun and slashed, and where the blade touched shadow, the darkness burned away like paper in a flame. A void creature lunged at Kira from behind. David was there before she could turn, his sword cutting through the shadow's core. The creature dissolved with a shriek that echoed in dimensions humans couldn't normally perceive. David! Kira stared at him. Your eyes. He could see his reflection in her golden gaze. His eyes blazed with blue fire and trails of light followed his movements. The sword felt weightless in his hands like it was part of his arm, part of his soul. More shadows poured through the broken walls. Roth and the other warriors fought with their basic weapons, but they were too slow. The void creatures moved like liquid nightmares, reforming after each strike. Only David's blade could truly harm them. Elder Cirrus stood in the center of the chamber, her hands moving in complex patterns. Energy barriers formed around the group, buying them seconds. But even she looked strained. The temple cannot hold much longer. We must retreat to the ship. No, David said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. If we run, they'll follow. They'll destroy the ship and then hunt us across the galaxy. I can feel it. They want this sword destroyed more than anything. Then what do you propose? Roth demanded, skewering a shadow with his spear. The creature writhed but didn't die. David looked at the largest void creature. It hung back from the battle, watching, testing, learning. It was bigger than the others, its form more solid, more real, and David could sense something behind it, a presence that made his blood run cold. "Their leader is here," he said. "Not in the temple, but close. If I can reach it, you'll die," Kira interrupted. "David, you've had that sword for 5 minutes. You don't know how to use it properly." "I know enough." David moved toward her and cupped her face with his free hand. The sword's glow softened, responding to his emotions. "Trust me. For once I need you to let me do this alone." Kira's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "Come back to me." "Always," he promised. Then he ran toward the large void creature. It roared and charged to meet him. David's sword met its shadow claws in a shower of sparks and light. The impact should have thrown him backward, but the sword's power flowed through him, making him faster, stronger. Not physically, but in ways that mattered more against an enemy that existed partially outside normal space. He could feel the void creature's hunger. Its endless need to consume. It had been feeding for eons, devouring entire civilizations, and still it starved. That was its weakness. It could never be satisfied. Never be full. Never be complete. David pressed his attack, driving the creature back through the broken wall and out into the ash-covered wasteland. Behind him, he heard Kira calling his name, but he couldn't stop. The sword pulled him forward, showing him the path. The large creature led him away from the temple, deeper into the ruins of the ancient city. Other shadows followed, forming a circle around them. David realized too late that he had been lured into a trap. The creatures attacked as one. David spun and cut, his sword leaving trails of light in the air. He moved like water, like fire, like a storm given human form. Each strike destroyed a shadow, but more kept coming. His arms began to ache. His breath came in gasps. The sword's power was incredible, but it was burning through him, using his life force as fuel. He fell to one knee, sword tip touching the gray ash. The void creature sensed his weakness and closed in for the kill. Then something changed. The largest shadow creature began to grow. It absorbed the other shadows, pulling them into itself. Within seconds, it had doubled in size. Then doubled again. It became a titan of darkness, blocking out the dim sun, and David felt the presence behind it grow stronger. A consciousness so vast and ancient that it hurt to think about. The Void King. Not fully manifested, but close enough to reach through and touch reality. "Little human." A voice spoke directly into his mind. It sounded like breaking glass and dying stars. "You carry an old enemy, a weapon that caused me pain once. But you are not the warrior who forged it. You are weak, unpracticed, afraid." David tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't support him. The sword's light dimmed. He could feel his life draining away, used up by the weapon's power. Elder Cirrus had warned him. This blade could kill even the one who wielded it. "You are right," he whispered to the darkness. "I am weak. I've always been weak." The Void King laughed, and the sound made David's ears bleed. "Then why do you resist? Join me, become shadow. Become nothing. It is so much easier than fighting." David thought about that. How easy it would be to just give up. To let the darkness take him. He was tired of being mocked. Tired of being the weak human in a galaxy of warriors. Tired of seeing doubt in Kira's eyes when she thought he wasn't looking. But then he thought about her smile. The way she laughed at his stupid jokes. How she held his hand when they walked through the markets on Throne Prime. How she had chosen him despite what everyone said. Despite what she could have had. "I resist," David said, forcing himself to stand, "because that's what humans do. We're not the strongest. We're not the fastest. We're not the most advanced. But we never quit. We never surrender. And we never leave someone we love to face the dark alone." The sword blazed back to life, brighter than before. David's eyes burned with blue fire as he raised the blade high. "You want to know what makes humans dangerous? It's not our weapons or our technology. It's that we choose to care. We choose to love. And we'll fight the whole universe to protect what we love." He charged the Void Titan. It swung a massive shadow claw at him, but David ducked under it and drove his sword into the creature's center. The blade sank deep and light exploded outward. The Void Titan screamed. Its form began to break apart, shadows peeling away like old paint. But it wasn't enough to destroy it. The Void King's presence grew stronger, trying to force more power into its servant. David felt the sword responding. It wanted more. More energy. More life force. More of him. If he gave it what it needed, he could destroy the Titan. But the cost would be everything. Kira's face flashed through his mind. Their wedding day. Her promise to grow old with him. The children they had talked about having someday. He couldn't pay that price. Not yet. David pulled the sword free and retreated, stumbling in the ash. The Void Titan reformed, damaged but not destroyed. The Void King's laughter echoed across the dead world. Weak, the voice mocked. You cannot even sacrifice yourself properly. You cling to your pathetic life. Yes, David admitted, tears streaming down his glowing eyes. I do, because unlike you, I have something worth living for. Footsteps behind him. David turned to see Kira, Roth, and the other warriors emerging from the temple ruins. They had followed him, refusing to let him face the darkness alone. Kira stood beside him, her blade ready. You said to trust you, I do. But trust goes both ways. If you fight, we fight together. Roth took position on his other side. I called you weak, human. I was wrong. Weakness is giving up. Weakness is standing aside. You ran toward the darkness while others fled. That is strength. The other warriors formed a line with them. None of them had glowing swords or magical powers. But they stood firm anyway, ready to die fighting rather than live cowering. David looked at them all and felt the sword respond to his emotions. Not to his fear or his pain, but to his hope. His love for these people who had chosen to stand with him. The blade blazed brighter than ever before. Together then, he said, raising the sword of dawn's breaking. Let's show this thing what happens when you threaten our galaxy. The Void Titan roared and charged. The battle was far from over. News of the battle on Ash's End spread across the galaxy faster than light travel. A human had wielded a Heaven's Edge weapon. A human had wounded a Void Titan. The story grew with each telling until David barely recognized himself in the tales. Back on Throne Prime, everything changed. Humans were no longer ignored or mocked. Scientists wanted to study them. Military leaders wanted to recruit them. Politicians wanted to make alliances. Overnight, humanity went from the weakest species in the coalition to the most sought after. David hated every moment of it. He sat in a medical bay while doctors examined him for the 100th time. The sword of dawn's breaking rested beside him, its light dimmed but never fully gone. Using it on Ash's End had changed him permanently. His eyes still glowed faintly in darkness. He could sense void creatures from miles away, and he could feel the sword's hunger, always whispering at the edge of his mind. Elder Cirrus had explained that the sword was bonded to him now. It fed on his life force, slowly burning through him. She estimated he had maybe 10 years left, 20 if he rarely used the blade's full power. But every time he fought, every time he called upon its strength, he shortened that timeline. Kira refused to accept it. She spent every free moment researching, looking for some way to break the bond or stop the drain. But David knew the truth. This was the price of power. His ancestors had paid it. Now it was his turn. You should rest, Kira said, entering the medical bay with food. She had barely left his side since they returned from Ash's End. The doctors say you're pushing yourself too hard. There's no time to rest, David said, accepting the food gratefully. Every day the void grows stronger. They're testing our defenses across the border, probing for weaknesses. Let someone else fight. You've done enough, have I? David gestured to the news feeds playing on the wall screens. They showed void attacks on 3 different colonies. Coalition forces were losing badly. Energy weapons still fed the creatures. Traditional weapons worked but required getting close, and most species weren't fast enough. They need me, Kira. I need you, she said quietly. Not for 10 years or 5 years. I need you for a lifetime. David pulled her close, breathing in her scent. She smelled like fire and steel and home. I know, but if I don't fight, there might not be a lifetime for anyone. Before she could respond, alarms blared throughout the station. Both of them rushed to the command center, David grabbing his sword on the way. Commander Roth met them at the entrance, his face grim. Throne Prime is under attack. The Void has brought an army. Through the massive windows, David could see them, hundreds of shadow creatures materializing in orbit around the capital world. Ships engaged them, but plasma fire only made them stronger. Fighters exploded as shadows engulfed them. Defense stations went dark as their power was drained. And behind the army, partially hidden in the darkness between stars, David could sense it. The Void King, not just reaching through anymore. Actually here, he's manifested, Elder Cirrus said, joining them. She looked older than David had ever seen her, as if the years she had cheated were finally catching up. The seals have failed completely. The Void King has returned in full. How do we fight it? Roth demanded. How do we stop it? We can't, the Elder said simply. Not without all 7 Heaven's Edge weapons. David has one. The other 6 are lost, scattered across the galaxy when the last generation of Guardians fell. David watched the Shadow Army descending toward Throne Prime. Millions of people lived on that world. Humans, Draconians, Thorians, dozens of species all mixed together. If the void reached the surface, they would all die. Then we make do with what we have, he said, making his decision. I'll go out there. Buy you time to evacuate. Don't be stupid, Kira snapped. You saw what happened on Ash's End. One Titan nearly killed you. There are hundreds of them out there now. She's right, Roth agreed. This is a suicide mission. David looked at his sword. The blade hummed softly, sensing his determination. It would give him power. Enough power to hurt the Void Army. Maybe enough to wound the Void King itself, but it would burn through his remaining years in minutes. He would be ash long before the battle ended. He was about to accept that fate when something unexpected happened. The command center doors burst open. Humans poured in, dozens of them, then hundreds. They came from every part of the station. Civilians, soldiers, engineers, teachers, young and old. They all carried weapons. Not energy weapons, but simple things. Knives, clubs, metal bars. Anything that wouldn't feed the void. At the front of the group stood Captain Nira Fenn, David's old friend from the diplomatic corps. She carried a steel pipe like it was a plasma rifle. We heard what's happening. We're here to fight. This is madness, Roth said. You're civilians. You have no training. We're human, Nira corrected. That's all the training we need. She looked at David at his glowing sword. You showed us what we could be. What we've always been. Now let us show you that you're not alone. David felt something stir inside him. Not the sword's power, but something deeper. Something that had nothing to do with ancient weapons or cosmic wars. It was hope. Pure, stubborn human hope. And he wasn't the only one feeling it. Around the galaxy, on 100 different worlds, humans were waking up to their heritage. Simple tools began to glow in their hands. Hammers blazed with light. Kitchen knives hummed with power. A grandmother's walking stick burst into blue flame. It wasn't just David anymore. Humanity remembered what it had forgotten. They were the Guardians, the ones who stood against the dark. Not because they were strong, but because they refused to be anything else. Elder Cirrus laughed, tears streaming down her ancient face. I hoped. I dared to hope. But I didn't think it would happen so fast. What's happening? Kira asked. Awakening, the Elder said. When one human wields a Heaven's Edge weapon, it reminds the others what they are capable of. It spreads like wildfire. Every human with enough conviction, enough will to fight, becomes a weapon against the void. David looked at the hundreds of glowing humans in the command center. Then at the screen showing thousands more across Throne Prime. And reports were flooding in from other worlds. Human colonies arming themselves with whatever they could find, turning basic tools into weapons of light. It's still not enough, Roth said quietly. Look, the Void Army had noticed the awakening. They changed tactics, rushing toward the planet faster. The Void King's presence grew overwhelming. Reality itself bent around it, creating storms of shadow that consumed everything they touched. David gripped his sword tighter. Maybe it's not enough, but it's what we have. And I've learned something fighting the void. They can't understand us. They can't comprehend why we don't give up. Why we keep fighting when logic says we should run. He turned to face the assembled humans. They think fear should control us. That being weak means being helpless. They're wrong. Being afraid and fighting anyway? That's courage. Being physically weak and standing up to monsters? That's strength. Being told you'll lose and trying your hardest anyway? That's human. The humans roared agreement. Their weapons blazed brighter. David raised the sword of Dawn's breaking high. The Void King wants to consume our world? Let's teach it what happens when humanity says no. Ships began launching from Throne Prime's docks. Not just military vessels, but civilian transports, cargo haulers, even personal shuttles. All carrying humans armed with glowing weapons. They flew toward the Shadow Army like moths toward flame. David and Kira stood together on the lead ship's bridge. She had found an old metal staff and it glowed in her hands, responding to her love for him. Their bond, it seemed, was strong enough to bridge the gap between species. "If we die out there," she said quietly, "I want you to know I never regretted choosing you." "We're not dying," David replied. "I've got too much to live for." The ship entered the Shadow Army. Void creatures swarmed around them, but human-wielded weapons cut through them like light through fog. It was working. They were fighting back, but the Void King itself loomed ahead, a hole in space large enough to swallow moons. David could feel it watching him, judging him, finding him wanting soon they would meet, and one way or another this war would end. The battle raged around Throne Prime like a storm of light and shadow. David stood on the observation deck of a coalition warship, watching thousands of humans fight alongside alien warriors. It should have been impossible. Humans with glowing kitchen knives and metal pipes standing against cosmic horrors. Yet they were winning. Slowly, painfully, they were pushing the Void Army back. But the Void King remained. It floated in space like a wound in reality, absorbing the shadows of its fallen servants and growing larger. David could feel its attention focused on him. On the sword at his hip, on the light that hurt it so badly millennia ago. Elder Cirrus stood beside him, her staff dim. She looked frail, as if the battle had aged her centuries. "You know what you have to do." "Kill it," David said simply. "Seal it," she corrected. "The Void King cannot be killed. It is hunger given form, emptiness made real. You can only trap it again. Lock it away where it cannot feed. And that requires all 7 Heaven's Edge weapons," David said. "But I only have one." The elder shook her head slowly. The original 7 weapons were crafted by 7 warriors, each representing a different aspect of humanity. Courage, hope, love, sacrifice, determination, compassion, and defiance. But the truth that was forgotten is this: those aspects exist in every human. You don't need 7 swords. You need 7 humans willing to give everything. David understood then the terrible cost that was about to be asked. "It will kill them." "Yes," Elder Cirrus said softly. "The sealing ritual burns through life force like paper in a furnace." The original Guardians sacrificed themselves to trap the Void King the first time. They knew they would die. They did it anyway. "Then I'll do it alone," David said firmly. "I'm already bonded to the sword. My life is already forfeit. Let me be enough." "You can't be," the elder said. "One light, no matter how bright, cannot contain that much darkness. You need others. 6 others willing to stand with you until the very end." David looked out at the battle, at the humans fighting and dying, at Kira, commanding a group of warriors on a nearby ship, at Captain Nira leading civilian volunteers, at all the people who had believed in him when everyone else called him weak. How could he ask them to die? As if reading his thoughts, Elder Cirrus touched his shoulder. "You won't have to ask. They'll volunteer. That's what humans do." She was right. When David explained the situation over the fleet-wide communication, silence fell. Then voices began speaking. Hundreds of volunteers. Thousands. Every human in the fleet was willing to give their life if it meant stopping the Void King. David's vision blurred with tears. These people, mocked and belittled throughout the galaxy, were ready to sacrifice everything for species that had looked down on them. In the end, he chose 6. Captain Nira, who had been his friend since they were both young diplomats. A teacher named Grace, who had awakened her power to protect her students. A mechanic called Henry, whose wrench glowed brighter than any plasma torch. A doctor named Lou, who had used his scalpel to save dozens during the outpost attack. A young girl named Sophie, barely 16, whose determination was fierce enough to light up the dark. And a grandfather named Thomas, who said he had lived long enough and wanted his death to matter. Kira protested violently when she realized she wasn't chosen. "I'm your wife. I should be with you." "That's exactly why you can't be," David said, holding her close. "I need you to live, Kira. I need you to remember me. To tell our story. To make sure humanity never forgets what they're capable of." "I don't want to be the one left behind," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I know," he said, "but someone has to survive to make this sacrifice worth it. Please let it be you." She kissed him then, fierce and desperate. When they finally broke apart, she pressed her forehead to his. "I'll remember. I'll make sure the whole galaxy remembers, that everyone knows the truth about humans, about you." The 7 chosen humans gathered on a small transport ship. David had expected fear or regret, but he saw only determination. They knew what was coming. They chose it anyway. Roth insisted on piloting them toward the Void King. The proud draconian warrior had changed so much since that first day in the ceremony hall. I mocked you once, he said as they flew into the darkness. Called you weak. I was the weak one. Too blind to see strength when it wore a different face. You see it now, David said. That's what matters. The transport entered the Void King's presence. Reality bent around them. The ship's systems failed one by one. But they didn't need systems. They had something better. The 7 humans stood in a circle, weapons raised. David's sword blazed at the center, but the others' weapons glowed just as bright. A pipe wrench, a teacher's ruler, a scalpel, a metal rod, a simple knife, a walking stick. Tools of peace turned into weapons of war by the sheer force of human will. The Void King spoke, its voice making the ship's hull scream. You think 7 lights can bind me? I have consumed galaxies, devoured entire realities. What are you but insects before a storm? We're human, David said simply. That's enough. They struck as one. 7 weapons piercing toward the Void King's core. Blue light erupted, brighter than stars. The Void King roared, thrashing. But the light held it, wrapped around it like chains. David felt the sword drinking his life. Not years anymore, but seconds. He could feel the others fading too. Sophie's light dimmed first. She smiled as she disappeared, her last words a whisper. Tell my mom I was brave. Thomas went next, his old body unable to sustain the power. But he laughed as he faded, actually laughed. Now that's a way to go. One by one they fell. Each death made the chains brighter. Each sacrifice bound the Void King tighter. Henry, Liu, Grace. Captain Nira gave David one last nod before she vanished into light. Then it was just David. Alone before the Void King. The monster was trapped, but not sealed. One more death. One more sacrifice his. But as his life drained away, David felt something unexpected. The humans who had died weren't gone. Not completely. Their light remained woven into the chains. Their will, their determination, their hope. It was still there, still fighting, and across the galaxy billions of humans felt it too. They had awakened to their heritage. They had remembered what they could be. That memory, that awakening fed power into the chains. Not life force, but something that transcended individual existence. Collective human defiance. The Void King screamed as it was dragged down, sealed not just by 7 deaths, but by the combined will of an entire species saying no to the darkness. David's vision faded. He could see Kira on the communication screen crying his name. He wanted to tell her it was okay, that he wasn't afraid, that he loved her, but his voice wouldn't work anymore. Then Elder Cirrus was there somehow in the space between life and death. There is another way, she said. Not the way of the ancient guardians. A new path, but it requires sacrifice of a different kind. What kind? David managed to whisper. To truly seal the Void King forever, someone must guard the prison. Watch over it for all time. They would exist partially outside normal reality like I do. Living but not living. Present but distant. It would be a half-life, David. But it would be life. Do it, he said without hesitation. You'll see your wife again. Elder Cirrus warned. But you'll never truly be with her. You'll watch her age while you remain unchanged. You'll see her die while you continue on. Are you certain? David thought of Kira alone, grieving. He thought of humanity's future, protected by his watch. He thought of all the people who had sacrificed themselves so he could make this choice. I'm certain, he said. A half-life with her is better than an eternity without her. Light exploded. The Void King was sealed. The chains locked into place, anchored by David's transformed existence. He became the guardian, the watcher, the lock that would never break. When he opened his eyes, he stood on Throne Prime again. But everything was different. He could see energy flows invisible to others. Feel the Void King's prison, distant but present. The sword had become part of him, no longer draining his life but sustaining it in this strange new state. Kira ran to him, threw her arms around him. He was solid enough to hold, real enough to touch, but there was a distance now that hadn't existed before. A barrier he couldn't quite cross. You're alive, she sobbed. You're here. Yes, he said, holding her as close as he could. I'm here, and I always will be. He didn't tell her about the cost. Not yet. There would be time for that later. Time for everything later. He had all the time in the world now. The galaxy celebrated. Humans were hailed as heroes. The species who had been mocked and belittled had saved everyone. Throne Prime declared a new holiday. Remembrance Day, honoring the 7 who had died and the countless humans who had awakened to their heritage. Roth became the ambassador between draconians and humans. He spent his remaining years teaching anyone who would listen that strength came in many forms, that the weakest-looking being might carry the brightest light. The coalition restructured. Humans were given seats of honor. Their unique abilities were studied and respected. Never again would they be called weak. Never again would they be ignored. David watched it all from his strange half-existence. He walked beside Kira as she became a teacher, showing young warriors that power and compassion could coexist. He was there when she accepted honors in his name, there when she gave speeches about the day her husband lit up the heavens. She aged gracefully, her scales dimming from bright copper to deep bronze. David remained unchanged, forever young, forever watching. It hurt more than he had imagined. Every year that passed, every gray scale that appeared on her beautiful face, was a reminder of what he had given up. But he never regretted it. Not when she smiled at him. Not when she held his hand and felt real warmth, even if it wasn't quite the same as before. Not when she whispered that she loved him and he could still say it back. On her deathbed, surrounded by their adopted children and grandchildren, Kira looked at David with those golden eyes that had never stopped seeing him as strong. "You gave up everything for me," she whispered. "For us." "No," David corrected gently. "I gave up one life to keep you in another. That's not sacrifice. That's love." She smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Everyone called you weak. They were fools. You're the strongest person I ever knew." Then she closed her eyes and was gone. David felt the loss like a physical wound, but he didn't break. Couldn't break. He was the guardian now, the watcher, the light that kept the darkness at bay. He stood at her funeral, invisible to most, but the humans could see him glowing softly in the shadows. They nodded to him, acknowledging his sacrifice, acknowledging what he had become so they could live. Years turned to decades, decades to centuries. David watched as humanity spread across the galaxy. No longer timid but bold. They became leaders, teachers, protectors. They never forgot what they were capable of. Never forgot the day they had awakened. And David stood guard, forever vigilant, forever watching, forever the sword that had lit up the heavens to drive back the dark. Sometimes, in quiet moments, he would visit the memorial they had built for the 7 who had died. Their names were carved in stone that would last forever. David Reed, Nira Fenn, Grace Miller, Henry Park, Liu Chen, Sophie Adams, Thomas Wright. They called them the 7 Lights, the ones who had proven once and for all that humanity's strength wasn't in their bodies or their technology. It was in their refusal to give up, their determination to protect what they loved, their willingness to stand against the dark no matter the cost. David would trace the letters of his name, remembering the man he had been. The one who was called weak, the one who had proven them wrong. And then he would return to his watch, keeping the galaxy safe. One human standing against the infinite dark, not because he was strong, but because he was human and humans never quit.